In November of 1983, the United States prepared for a war that officially did not exist. There was no declaration, no emergency broadcast, no warning to the public. Yet, deep beneath Europe, inside reinforced command centers and underground bunkers, men were reviewing nuclear procedures that had not been touched in years. Secure lines were activated. Military headquarters went silent, not because nothing was happening, but because everything was. On the other side of the Iron Curtain, Soviet leaders reached a conclusion that would haunt them for decades. They believed the United States was preparing to launch a nuclear first strike, not as a threat, not as a bluff, but as a real, imminent attack. What made this moment uniquely dangerous was not simply how close the world came to nuclear war. It was the fact that the United States did not know the Soviets were preparing to respond. Two nuclear superpowers stood on the edge of annihilation, each trapped inside its own interpretation of reality, each convinced the other was about to make the first move. This is not the story of missiles being launched. It is the story of fear, of silence, and of misunderstanding. A misunderstanding so complete that for a brief moment in history, the end of civilization became a possibility without anyone realizing it was happening. This was Able Archer 83. To understand why this exercise became so dangerous, we must first understand the world in which it occurred. The early 1980s were not a calm phase of the Cold War. They were marked by renewed tension, ideological rigidity, and fading trust. The stability that followed the Cuban Missile Crisis had begun to erode. In Europe, the balance of power was shifting. The Soviet Union deployed a new generation of nuclear missiles capable of striking targets across Western Europe with little warning. These weapons were mobile, precise, and powerful. From Moscow's perspective, they were defensive. From Washington's perspective, they represented a destabilizing escalation. The United States responded deliberately. NATO announced that unless arms control negotiations succeeded, American nuclear missiles would be deployed in Europe. The intention was deterrence, not provocation. But deterrence depends on clarity, and clarity was becoming rare. When Ronald Reagan entered the White House, the language of the Cold War hardened. Reagan did not see the conflict as a mere geopolitical rivalry. He viewed it as a moral struggle between freedom and authoritarian control. In public speeches, he spoke with unusual directness, describing the Soviet system as an evil empire. To American audiences, this language affirmed resolve. To Soviet leaders, it signaled danger. Combined with a rapid expansion of U.S. military capabilities, Reagan's posture suggested that the United States was preparing not just to deter war, but to win it. Inside the Soviet leadership, fear began to replace confidence. Many officials had survived World War II. They remembered surprise attacks and catastrophic miscalculations. The idea that the United States might strike first was not dismissed. It was feared. This fear became institutionalized. Soviet intelligence launched massive efforts to detect early signs of nuclear war. Diplomats, analysts, and agents were instructed to interpret every Western action through the lens of possible attack. In this atmosphere, even routine NATO activities appeared threatening. As 1983 progressed, tensions deepened. American bombers approached Soviet airspace and turned back at the last moment. NATO naval forces operated aggressively near sensitive regions. Each move was legal, controlled, and strategic, yet each reinforced Soviet paranoia. Then came an event that pushed relations to the edge. In September 1983, a civilian airliner entered Soviet airspace after a navigational error. Believing it to be hostile, Soviet forces shot it down. Everyone on board was killed. The incident shocked the world and shattered what little trust remained. By the time autumn arrived, fear dominated strategic thinking on both sides, and the stage was set for the most dangerous misunderstanding of the Cold War. Only weeks after the airliner tragedy, President Reagan announced a new defense initiative designed to intercept incoming nuclear missiles. To Americans, it was presented as protection. To Soviet leaders, it appeared to undermine the logic of deterrence itself. If the United States could block retaliation, a first strike suddenly seemed possible. By late 1983, the Soviet Union felt surrounded by uncertainty, and it was in this environment that NATO launched Able Archer 83. Officially, Able Archer was a command post exercise intended to test communication and decision-making during a nuclear crisis. Similar exercises had been conducted before, but this one was different in ways that mattered deeply. Able Archer simulated the full escalation from conventional conflict to nuclear release. It involved new encrypted communications, extended radio silence, and participation from senior political leaders. The realism was unprecedented. To NATO planners, this realism improved readiness. To Soviet intelligence officers watching closely, it looked like preparation. Reports flowed into Moscow suggesting that NATO forces were shifting posture. Aircraft activity increased. Communication patterns changed. Troop movements aligned with known attack scenarios. Each individual detail could be explained away. Together, they formed a picture of imminent war. Soviet leadership faced a terrifying dilemma. If they ignored the signs and were wrong, the Soviet Union could be destroyed in a surprise attack. If they reacted too strongly and were wrong, they might start the very war they feared. As Able Archer continued, Soviet forces quietly increased readiness. Air units prepared for possible launch orders. Nuclear weapons were repositioned closer to deployment sites. Command centers remained on constant alert. At the height of the exercise, the world stood unknowingly on the edge of catastrophe. No alarms sounded in Western cities. No one rushed to shelters. Yet, in Soviet bunkers, officers prepared for what they believed could be the final hours before nuclear war. The most dangerous aspect of this moment was not aggression, but misinterpretation. NATO believed it was conducting an exercise. The Soviet Union believed it was witnessing the opening phase of World War III. And neither side fully understood what the other was thinking. What prevented disaster was not certainty, but hesitation. Despite mounting fear, Soviet commanders did not act immediately. They waited, searching for confirmation. Hours passed, then days. No missiles were launched, no attack followed. Gradually, panic gave way to doubt. As Able Archer concluded and NATO forces returned to normal operations, it became clear that no strike was coming. The Soviet Union stood down its forces. The immediate danger passed. The world moved on, unaware of how close it had come to annihilation. Only years later did the truth emerge. After the Cold War ended, declassified documents revealed the depth of Soviet fear during Able Archer 83. Western intelligence had underestimated how threatening the exercise appeared. Actions intended as deterrence had been interpreted as preparation. Able Archer 83 revealed the most dangerous reality of the nuclear age. War does not require hatred or intent. Sometimes it requires only misunderstanding. The lesson left a lasting mark. In the years that followed, the United States and the Soviet Union took steps to reduce nuclear arsenals and improve communication. Leaders recognized that miscalculation, not ideology, posed the greatest threat to humanity. Able Archer did not end the Cold War, but it changed how nuclear powers thought about escalation and restraint. In November of 1983, civilization survived not because it was ready, but because nothing went wrong. And that may be the most frightening lesson of all.